Welcome to the Ketovangelist Kitchen. I'm Brian.
And I'm Carrie.
And this podcast is dedicated to making things simple and easy for you in the kitchen. Carrie Brown is a classically trained, world-class chef who has a passion for creating ketogenic recipes that taste better than anything you've ever experienced. But more than that, she loves teaching people how to cook the right way.
And each week on this podcast, Brian and I discuss all the ways you can create awesome keto food that is guaranteed to make you a rock star in the kitchen.
If you'd like to learn more about Ketovangelist Kitchen, you can go to KetoVangelistKitchen.com and sign up for the newsletter.
In exchange for your email address, you'll get brand new recipes delivered to your inbox, ready for you to whip up in the kitchen and enjoy with your friends and family.
So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and learn. You're about to enter the Ketovangelist Kitchen. Hey everybody, I'm Brian. That's Carrie. Say hi, Carrie.
Hello, lovely people.
And hey, Carrie, what are we talking about today?
Nuts.
I really want to let that go for a really long time.
Now you have to explain it because, like, you and I are the only people alive that knows what that is.
Oh man, I hope not. Oh, okay. So we're gonna.
Wow, I've never heard you laugh like that. That was awesome. Maybe we should have that as our intro music.
I think it's trademarked, but I would do it. So, hang on. Okay, so that right there is what's called the Benny Hill theme. What is the name of the actual song? It's called I do not remember. It's called Yakety Sax. That's what it's called. That's the name of the song. And Benny Hill had it as his theme. Now, the reason I did that is because we're talking about nuts, and nuts is a double entendre, which is one of Benny Hill's signature moves to both entertain the kids and the adults in the room. So I was
without the kids knowing what in the world was going on.
Right, exactly. So I'm a huge fan of Benny Hill, and I just wanted to do that because it's my show. Get your own. All right, so Carrie Brown, can we get serious for a moment? Can we concentrate, please, on what we're supposed to be doing?
Really? It's Friday.
Is it? Oh man,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The days are all mixed together. Okay, we're talking about nuts. Now, why are we talking about nuts exactly?
Well, it's possibly a little bit random, but when you text me earlier, you said, let's talk about food. And I read that and went nuts. And I think it might be because I've spent the last 2 weekends of my life wading around in almond flour because I've this cookbook for the holidays, the holiday cookbook that I'm working on. So I've actually spent an inordinate amount of time over the last 2 weeks buried in nuts. So that was probably why when you said food, I went nuts, food, nuts. That just, it's kind of just been my life for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, so there's a rule as a writer, there's a rule that you write what you know. So apparently the same as in podcasting. So you talk about what you know. So right now you've got nuts on the brain.
I have nuts on the brain. And nuts are very important to us keto people.
So why is that? Why are nuts important?
Nuts are magical.
Okay. No, not everything in the kitchen's magical. Like we had a scale was magical recently and now nuts are magical. Not everything can't be magical.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm wrong. Okay. Why then are nuts so magical?
Nuts are magical because they are packed with large amounts of healthy fats.
Right. So first of all, but okay, not first of all, because we're well past the first part. I do want to make sure we make a distinction about what an actual nut is. there are some things that are categorized as nuts, but they're not really nuts. And I think the most common example that people can bring up are peanuts. They're categorized as nuts, but the truth of the matter is they're legumes or more closely related to peas or beans. So they may have the word nuts in the name, but they're not actually nuts. Another one would be cashews. Cashews are seeds. They're not actually nuts. So even though they're in the same container as, when you get a thing of mixed nuts and they've got cashews in it, yeah, they're fine. They're categorized that way in the grocery store, but they're not actually the same as a nut. So their constituent parts are also a little bit different too as a result.
And why is that important to know?
Well, I think I like how this is switched. Now all of a sudden I'm on the hot seat. So it's important to know because it's important.
I do like to keep things interesting for our listeners.
Right. This is not on the script.
We don't have a script.
Right. So for the record, we don't actually have a script. It's basically just Carrie telling me to shut up and let her take care of the information. What was I talking about? Oh yeah. So the reason that's important is because seeds are higher in carb count than nuts would be because their function, their biological function is a different function. The organism survives on seeds. It doesn't survive on, because a nut is a kind of fruit from the organism. A seed is something that supplies energy to the organism. So their constituent parts are going to be different because they have a different job. So for example, cashews are going to have higher levels of carbs than, say, Brazil nuts. So you want to know that so that you can identify which are the more keto-friendly kinds of nuts.
Right, and to put that into some kind of data context, because we know you all love data, cashews are more than twice as carb-filled as Brazil nuts, and more than 3 times the amount of carbs per 100 grams that macadamia nuts have, for example. So you can eat cashews, but just be aware that if you're eating the same amount of macadamias versus cashews, you're getting more than 3 times the amount of carbs in the same amount.
Right. So
again, we're not saying don't eat them. We're just saying be aware that a nut is not a nut. It's a spectrum. It's a continuum, like everything else. Is that macadamia's down the very low carb end, and pumpkin seeds and pistachio nuts, cashews are way down the other end.
Right. So, and I want to
adjust accordingly.
Right. So adjust accordingly. It's not, but also I'd like to point out that it's not just that they're on the low carb end, they're also in the better, higher fat end. Like for example, the only nut that is higher in fat content than a macadamia nut is a pili nut. And pili nuts are harder to find these days, but that's changing. But since macadamia nuts are more or less prevalent inside grocery stores, that's basically the most keto-friendly nut you can buy because it's got really high levels of really good monounsaturated fats and really low levels of carbs. Brazil nuts are right behind it, right? They're very, very close to that. Brazil nuts, on the other hand, are super good for folks who are looking for magnesium, really, really high in magnesium. They may be the most perfect magnesium food that you can find. So,
and that's just reminded me of another important point, and I think and I don't think we do it deliberately, but I think we in the keto world we kind of have our favorites, and we tend to focus on a kind of a narrow band of ingredients. But you bring up a good point, is that not only do nuts are made up of different healthy fats, they're not all made up of the same. And not only do they have different amounts of carbs in them, but they also kind of specialize in their own micronutrients. So I would encourage us to not just think about, I eat macadamias and almonds, but, have some pine nuts, have some Brazil nuts, have some chia seeds, have some walnuts, have some hazelnuts. Don't just you'll be getting better overall nutrition if you kind of mix things up.
Right. And it's just like anything else. If you eat the same exact thing every single day, which I'm not opposed to doing, but if you eat the same exact thing every single day without any kind of variety, you're not setting yourself up for the best kind of long-term health results. So having a little bit of variety within the context of the certain food groups is kind of important.
And it also, and you know, apart from people like Brian, and I think we've established there's only people like 3 people on Earth like Brian, but
That's true.
it makes it a lot easier to stick to a ketogenic diet if you widen the number of foods you eat, because it just makes it more interesting. You know, variety is the spice of life, unless you're Brian. So that will also make it more interesting, and I think easier to stick to if you've got more choices that are still great. So just, you know, broaden, don't just stick with almonds and macadamias.
I will say this.
Some other flavors, and you know, so it's on a kind of a mental, emotional taste level that varying things and not sticking to the same thing is also a good thing.
Right. Well, I will say this, that when you find a variety of keto friendly food items, it's, you know, why not investigate? You might find something you like. For example, I like hazelnuts way more than I like macadamia nuts, but I know that macadamia nuts are better for me than hazelnuts. So I eat more macadamia nuts than hazelnuts. But man, I'll tell you right now, because I grew up eating, if you're not familiar with the Nutella spread, you didn't grow up in Europe, I guess. But Nutella was like a staple of my childhood, and it's a hazelnut spread, and that's when I realized that I really like hazelnuts. And then for a while there was a commercially available ice cream that you could buy that had hazelnut flavored ice cream with other stuff in it, and fell in love with that. So I really like hazelnuts as a flavor. They're really, really good. But macadamia nuts are better for me, so that's why I eat more of them. Plus, macadamia nuts are good anyway. But we have talked about this before, but I want to reiterate this. I want you to reiterate this now. Is it best to store nuts in a really hot, damp environment, or is it maybe better to store them somewhere else?
Nobody likes rancid nuts. Trust me on that one, Brian. Trust me. Nobody.
Okay.
And because nuts, thankfully, are full of all these healthy fats, when they get warm, they go rancid very quickly. So you should keep your nuts and your seeds in the freezer.
So that's our public service announcement for today. Oh, you are like a child, Carrie Brown. You are like a child.
Here to serve, Brian. Here to serve.
Okay, so we all know.
If you can't have fun, what's the point?
What is the point exactly? All right, so here's a list of some of the nuts that are good for you, or that are at least in the ballpark of keto friendly. Almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews for some people. I tend to not eat a lot of cashews, but you know, whatever. It's up to you. Chestnuts are totally okay. Hazelnuts, let's see, macadamia nuts, obviously, that we talked about. Pecans. In the United States, okay, hold on. I need to take a break for just 1 second. In jolly old England, Carrie Brown, is it pronounced pecan, or pecan?
Pecan.
It's pecan. Okay, so now we got a 5th pronunciation. In the United States, it really depends on where you are. I've always pronounced them pecans, but apparently in the great state of Texas, they don't like that sort of thing.
In defense of Americans everywhere, we say pecan, but we don't even have them. So that's why we don't know how to say it.
We're not even sure what they are.
We don't even know what they are. I'm like, what's a pecan?
It's, yeah. Okay, so pine nuts also. Pistachios. Pistachios I kind of lump in there with cashews as well. They're higher in carbs, and they're probably not the best choice. But having said that, I fully admit that there are times where I'll snack on them for whatever reason. If you get some good ones, they're really high in salt because they salt the tar out of them. So that's a good way to get some salt. Walnuts also. Is it just me, or do walnuts look like they're like when you crack one open and it's still like if you don't break the actual meat of the nut, it looks like a brain, doesn't it? Like
It does.
So that's
Have you ever cut? I have a friend here in Seattle who has all these. He bought a house with like an acre of forest, literally on it, and he invited me over one day because he had all these trees and he had no idea what they were, but they were growing things that weren't leaves. And so he took me for a walk in the forest and said, "What's this and what's that and what's that?" And I had never seen a walnut tree, and the walnut fruit is just the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
If you get one when it's like a long way, when it's kind of new and just kind of starting to grow, and cut it open, it's fascinating.
It's very hefty. It's not the.
They look like a fig. They look like
Right.
figs on
Right.
on the tree, and then you take them out. And I'm like, that's a fig tree, and I cut it down, and I cut it open. And I went, oh yeah, that's not a fig tree.
No.
But you could see the whole brain thing going on. And I'm like, oh my god, that's a walnut. Fascinating.
And that
Sorry.
as kind of a corollary to that, a lot of commercially bought like walnuts, for example, they're not peaked at the they're not picked at the peak season. They're picked in order to ship. They get close enough. But if you get stuff that's freshly made, freshly picked off the tree, it's kind of a little bit different. It's got a little bit more of a fuller taste, fuller feel to it. It's got a slightly sweeter taste, but it's not higher in sugar. It's just it's been allowed to ripen a little bit. So anyway, my point is walnuts are good, right?
Walnuts are good, and that reminded me that the absolute best, if you can, and at the right time of year, the absolute best way to buy nuts is to buy fresh nuts in their shells. I know not everywhere, it's not possible for everybody,
Right.
or they don't want to spend a weekend shelling nuts, or whatever. But that is the best way to buy them if you can.
Yeah.
Otherwise, probably the freshest way to get them is at the bulk bins. Tend to have, where you scoop your own, they tend to have higher turnover, so fresher.
And they're cheaper. That way.
And they're cheaper rather than and we do tend to eat, more nuts than average people. So cheap is good. Actually, nuts.com are a good place for bulk nuts. And I've had very good product and a very fast service from them. But once you get them, whether you buy them shelled or unshelled, try to get them as fresh as possible and then straight in the freezer. And because nuts have such a high fat content, you don't have to, think ahead and defrost them. You can literally eat them out of the freezer. You don't need to defrost them before you do anything with them, because they don't freeze like most things freeze.
Well, so I took your advice, and the last several batches of macadamia nuts that I purchased, I kept in the freezer, and they are delightful. Now, if you have a chipped tooth or a tooth that's about to break, you probably want to let them thaw out a little bit, because they are slightly harder to chew maybe than, a room temperature macadamia, but they're pretty good. They're pretty good. I'm just saying.
Yeah, because macadamias are big and dense, but
Right.
For pecans and the smaller nuts, you other than the actual sensation of cold when you put it on your tongue, you wouldn't even notice that they'd just come out of the freezer. So don't let freezing think that that's going to kind of add a complicated step to your life because you have to defrost them, because you don't.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh goodness. So so almond flour too, I keep, because I use so much of it when developing recipes, that I buy the 25-pound boxes, and I keep the whole box in the freezer. So the almond flour is in the freezer, and then I have my working tub on the counter, and then every time it's empty, I'll just go in the freezer and cut off a block of frozen almond flour and stick it in my tub, and then off I go. So I keep a working amount in the kitchen, but the actual bulk box is in the freezer. And it's also incredibly cost effective. If you do use a lot of almond flour, if you do a lot of baking, it's much, much cheaper to buy it in a big old 25-pound or 15-pound box and keep it in the freezer. You'll save yourself a lot of money that way.
Right. That's a good tip. That's a good tip right there. Okay. So this has been a brief expose on what now?
Nuts.
All day long. All day.
Something that's been bothering me all week, or maybe not bothering me, but
okay.
Can I throw in a little like crazy kitchen tip?
Oh, absolutely not. We don't do tips around here.
Okay, so here's my crazy kitchen tip. Because I was wading around in almond flour all week, it got me to thinking about scones. And actually the most popular recipe on my entire blog are my sour cream and chive scones. And the second most popular is my cheesy biscuits or scones, whatever. It's a kind of just a, semantics, American biscuit, British scone. And a little lesser known tip, if you are having problems with your scones rising, it may be because the way you're cutting them out.
Huh.
So
what do you mean?
There's a reason why I will always tell you to buy metal cutters. Biscuit cutters or shape cutters or whatever, because metal actually the cutters, because they cut. Whereas if you have plastic ones, or if you use some other shaped implement like a little ramekin dish to cut, or a glass or something like that, that could be a reason why your scones are not rising. Because when you use a metal cutter, it's like a knife. You cleanly cut the sides of the scone. If you use something blunt, like an upside down cup or a plastic cutter or something else, you're kind of squishing. You're not cutting the sides cleanly. You're kind of squishing the sides down. You're almost sealing the sides of the scone, which makes it a lot harder for the thing to rise. Whereas with a metal cutter, you've cut it so the sides are not squished, so they have the ability to rise. So if you don't have metal cutters, my best advice would be to use a glass, but rest the glass on top and then actually cut round it with a knife rather than pushing through the scone dough with the cup or glass or whatever it is you're using.
All right, so no mashing. No smashing.
No mashing with things that don't have a sharp surface.
Right.
And that's why, lovely people, metal cutters are a thing, and they're actually an important thing, and it's not just a kind of a posh fad thing. There actually is a genuinely good reason why metal cutters are better. And that's why.
So is there actually a technique involved too, where you kind of you pivot clockwise and counterclockwise as you press down to make sure you avoid, or is it just a matter of just clunk and that's it?
You'll get the same thing if you're twisting. You're more likely to seal the sides of whatever it is you're cutting rather than just cleanly cutting through.
Quick and easy, right? Just
easy.
Get it done.
And as I say, if you don't have metal cutters, or you're waiting for your metal cutters, use something else as a guide, but then actually cut round the guide with a knife rather than pushing the guide through the dough.
All right, there you go. You heard it here first. We're breaking news.
There we go. That was my hot kitchen how to have rising scones tip of the day.
The proper way to cut a biscuit.
Right, mate.
All right. All right, Carrie, this has been fun. And I appreciate all of your brain stuff that you just spilled upon us. So thank you for all of that.
You're very welcome.
All right. Then
I'm like a walnut.
Yes, you are. You are. You grow on trees. And
thank God I don't.
All right. We'll talk to you next week then.
Bye.
Bye.